Hey there everyone, in today's video, I'm gonna be sharing some of my unpopular opinions on the LGBT. As a gay man myself, I have accumulated a few different views and perspectives about the community, and I just felt like sharing them in this video. I'm just gonna warn you all right now that a lot of them are quite controversial, especially one in particular, but I'm not gonna spoil it now. All I'm gonna say is that if you're not open to hearing very controversial opinions, this video is probably not for you, and you should stop watching here and skip this video. Anyway, that all being said, here are my unpopular LGBT opinions. The first unpopular opinion I have is that racial preferences aren't a big deal. I definitely need to specify some things with this one because I know that this is a very touchy subject, but I have thought long and hard about this topic in order to come up with my overall feelings on this. The truth of the matter is that at the end of the day, people are gonna find certain physical features attractive or not attractive, and as the saying goes, the heart wants what it wants. Now I do understand that when you exclude a whole race from your dating pool, that's essentially racism in the sense that the individual is discriminating and excluding a racial group from their dating pool. And honestly, the way I see it, it's what I like to call sexual racism. But honestly, as long as a person actually still treats the person with basic human decency, despite not having attraction for said person, I think that's more than enough. As someone who is black myself, and has been in a dating scene for a very long while now, I've just come to learn that sometimes people like what they like, and there's not much you can do to change that. And besides that, I've come across other black and Asian guys who prefer to date within their own race or among other non-white guys, and not many people say anything about that, and well, that just put things into perspective for me. That if we minorities can have the preference to date within our own race, why can't white people? The bottom line is that if you can still manage to at the very least treat the racial group that you're not attracted to with basic human decency, then I personally don't think the person is racist. They're just a person with certain preferences, and if you're a minority, it just means that it'll be all the more special when you find that right guy who actually doesn't mind and actually may even prefer you for your whole being, and I think that it will be all the more worth it in the end. My next unpopular opinion is on people saying their sexuality is queer. Honestly, no self-respecting gay or lesbian person calls themselves this, and really, I only really see bisexual people doing this, and it's annoying since it was intended to be a slur towards homosexual men. And it just comes off as insecurity when I see these kinds of people call themselves this, because it really does feel like they are too ashamed to admit that they are just bisexual, where they can be attracted to both sexes, even though it's clear that they're really embarrassed of their attraction towards the same sex, which is a whole other issue which is tied into internalized homophobia, but I'm not gonna get into that in this video. I have to wonder if these people even know what the definition of queer is, because according to the dictionary, it means odd, strange, and or unusual. And that is why it was used as a derogatory insult towards homosexual men back in the day. The point is, I think that calling yourself queer is stupid. If you're gay, just say you're gay, and if you're bisexual, just say you're bisexual. If you genuinely aren't sure, then just say bi-curious, because that is originally what the term was supposed to be for. People who were questioning their sexuality. My next unpopular opinion is that I don't believe in the concept of trans children. Now this one, I will be explaining more in another unpopular opinion that's on this list, but for now, the main thing I'll say is that children lack the mental capacity and fortitude to fully understand what they're saying. Children say things all the time, a lot of which they may not fully comprehend. This isn't to say that children are stupid or anything like that. Their brains are just still developing, and it's perfectly normal to say all sorts of things when you're a child, but adults shouldn't take everything children say seriously. And when it comes to the whole concept of transgender, it's just way too much for a child to fully comprehend and understand, and that's putting aside my own personal views on the trans ideology that I'll get into later in the video, but for now, I want to keep it short and sweet with this one. My main point is that children lack the life experience and mental capacity to make swift proclamations like this, and I just do not believe that trans children is a thing, and I'll explain more about that in another unpopular opinion I have further into the video. My next unpopular opinion is that I personally think that demisexuality is nonsense. I know it sounds harsh, but that's just how I feel. The concept of demisexuality reads that it's when the only time a person can find attraction for someone is if they already have a close emotional bond. That is ridiculous because it implies that heterosexual, homosexual, and bisexual people do not form close emotional relationships, and that is just so wrong. Heterosexual, homosexual, and bisexual people can and do make emotional connections with their respective partners, and some even prefer to have that before being intimate with said individual. I mean, really, going by that definition of demisexual, most people would be considered demisexual. Now, I have read that demisexuality is a branch of asexuality, but frankly, I believe that because asexuality, which I do have my own thoughts on that I won't get into here, it is not the same thing, and to be honest, the only people I see calling themselves demisexual are really just straight, young teenage girls to young adult-aged women who are trying to gain imaginary oppression points by trying to shoehorn themselves into the gay community. My next unpopular opinion is that I don't believe in pansexuality. As far as I'm concerned, pansexuality is another word for bisexuality. Yeah, I'm aware that people who claim to be pansexual are attracted to personality and not sex, but one, it just goes back to why I think demisexual is a ridiculous concept because it insinuates that heterosexual and homosexual people do not form emotional connections with their partners, and it's only just physical, which is not true. And two, sexuality is about sex, not your personality. At the end of the day, you are either male or female, and that is what determines your sexuality. If you're only attracted to the opposite sex, you are heterosexual. If you're only attracted to the same sex, you are homosexual. And if you can be attracted to both males and females, you would be bisexual. In the case of pansexuality with the whole I'm attracted to the person mantra, ultimately, that is just saying that they can be attracted to both sexes. And what is the attraction to both sexes? Bisexuality. Because unless these people mean that they can be attracted to inanimate objects or something, they are just bisexual. And FYI, heterosexual, homosexual, and bisexuals can and do develop and form emotional connections and attraction to their partner. But yeah, I don't believe in pansexuality. I just think it's another word for bisexual. My next unpopular opinion is TwoSpirit being a sexuality or a gender. TwoSpirit is not a gender, nor is it a sexuality. This is one that has bothered me for a very long time because of how blatantly misappropriated the term had become. I really hate to say this, but it has to be said, and that is that it really makes me cringe when I see white people call themselves TwoSpirit and wrongly say that the concept of TwoSpirit was that it meant that there was a third gender in Native American culture, when that just wasn't true. TwoSpirit was not a third gender or a third sex. It was a conceptual belief that was used in some Native American tribes that was designated towards men who didn't fit the expected man's role in the tribe. The men who didn't live up to masculine expectations and socialization and or preferred the role that was hoisted onto women. That, or if the man was homosexual, because to them, a homosexual man was not a full man, and they were seen as abnormal. In short, the concept of TwoSpirit has been pretty misappropriated by non-indigenous people, and it's honestly pretty unfortunate, and frankly, it needs to stop. My next unpopular opinion is that gay pride, or rather just pride, as it's referred as in the modern day, was never about gender. It was simply about homosexual rights, specifically rights for gays and lesbians, aka same-sex rights. In the last decade or so, I started seeing how people, mostly young, were saying that pride was about gender and sexuality, which was false, and it really annoys me every year when I see people lumping these two as the same. In the scope of the United States, Pride was an aftermath movement of the Stonewall riots that took place in New York City on June 28th to July 3rd of 1969 that was a pivotal moment that gained gay and lesbian people the right to live our lives freely without fear of prosecution that the gays and lesbians of the decades prior had to face. It was not about gender identity, nor was it about kink and fetish culture neither. It was simply just about same-sex rights. I'm sorry, but that's just the truth, and all the other stuff is just, well, nonsense in my honest opinion. My next unpopular opinion is when it comes to the phrase LGBTQ+ community. Frankly, I don't ever say that phrase because as far as I'm concerned, anything after the B should have not been included in the first place, because the whole point of the LGB was about sexuality, not about gender. You already know how I feel about the terms transgender, queer, and pansexual, but for the I, which is supposed to stand for intersex is not a sexuality. It's a genetic condition. And finally, the A for asexual. This may be a hot take, but asexual people do not face discrimination. At least not in the contextual way that homosexuality is treated in general society. I mean, sure, you may have some people who don't believe in asexuality, but what I mean is that they never had to face any legal repercussions or legal discrimination on the sole basis of their sexuality. The only issue I would see asexual people running into is just a lack of dating prospects, because asexuality is very rare, even rarer than homosexuality, but that's just life, and again, it doesn't really affect one's life through legislation, unlike homosexuality. In short, there is no place in the world where you'd be murdered or incarcerated for being asexual, unlike homosexuality. So all that said, no, I don't call it the LGBTQ++ alphabet soup community. I either call it LGB or just gay community. My next unpopular opinion is that I don't believe that there are an infinite amount of genders. First of all, gender is just short for gender expression, and gender expression really only has 3 concepts. These concepts are masculinity, femininity, and androgyny. That's it. All these other so-called genders are just different words to describe these already 3 established concepts, or at the worst, explain a bunch of nonsense. Things like pangender, polygender, genderqueer, non-binary, trigender, etc. It's all a bunch of nonsense and really just describes androgyny, or at the most, doesn't describe anything at all. I still remember that ridiculous gender chart image that was floating around the internet back in the early 2010s when it was published on Tumblr, because of course it was, and how it didn't really have a lot of genders listed on it. Even back then, I knew that it was ridiculous, but I also thought it was harmless and that it wouldn't get much traction. Imagine my shock when I see this chart again in 2017 and it had only doubled in size and became even more obnoxious than it already was. Though I think the reason why this happened was because those Tumblr kids started posting this nonsense onto YouTube a little after 2012, which made it spread even further. Either way, it doesn't change how ridiculous it was then and still is now. So in short, no, I don't believe in the absurd concept of multiple genders. It's just gender expression, and we already have 3 terms that best describe them just fine. The rest is a bunch of nonsense that started with teenagers on Tumblr who had way too much time on their hands. And my last unpopular opinion is that I don't believe in transgender ideology. I don't believe that you can change your sex. I don't believe that men can become women or women can become men. Women and men are not identities and are just extensions of sex, and they are not feelings in your head. And when you actually start analyzing the ideology and start to ask the hard questions, like defining man and woman without using stereotypes of the opposite sex, or using circular definitions, the ideology just comes crumbling down bit by bit and piece by piece. Now honestly, I have a lot to say about why I don't believe in the transgender ideology that has come about after years of researching, making certain observations, and a lot of critical thinking. And if I were to explain it all right now, this video would be even longer than it already is. So because of that, if you want to understand why I feel the way I do about this topic, I'll be making a separate video on my 3rd channel where I'll go into more detail and explanation about why I don't believe in the ideology. So if you're genuinely curious, just wait until I release that video, which will be coming in due time. I feel like this opinion will be one of the most contentious ones that I've shared, and I do understand why some people may be surprised or even shocked to hear someone like myself admit to this, but it is what it is. The only thing that I have to say is that my reasoning for it is not for the reasons that you are probably thinking. No, I do not hate trans-identified people or wish violence on them. It's just that after doing 3 to 4 years worth of my own research and critical analysis on it, I just don't believe in the concept of it. But again, I'm gonna have to save that for a separate video. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, just leave them below in the comment section and I'll get to them. And with that, those are my unpopular LGBT opinions. Thank you for watching the video to the end if you did, and until then, I'll see you all in the next video. Have a great day and take care. See ya guys.